What are you doing here?
You smell something?
It'll just be like a fan.
That's it.
Okay, I'll be more ready, but I'll just leave this stuff at the front desk.
All right, I think we're going to go ahead and get started. So, I ask those who are still outside to come on in.
Thank you.
Get those doors closed. That would be helpful as well. Numbers 10. So, the end of the first section of Numbers. So Numbers chapter 10. Most commentators say the first section actually ends at 10:10. The new section begins at 10:11 because that's 10:11 is when that actually leaves Sinai. But this is the transitional chapter. I think Sam is going to give you a mic, so you can turn it on when he gets here with that. And for those of you at home, if you can't hear, I'm sorry. You'll hear it. Like I said, we're going to be in Numbers chapter 10, so if you have your Bibles, you can open to there. Let me open us in prayer. Actually, let me grab my mic first. Thank you. All right, let me pray for us. Father, we do thank you for this chance to pause and to focus upon your word. I pray that your Spirit would lead us into your truth tonight, that you would open our eyes and our hearts to understand and to receive it, that you would sanctify us by it, that we might more and more bring forth this fruit in our lives. The praise of your glory, we pray in Jesus' name. Amen. All right, so we are in Numbers chapter 10, and again, our working assumption is that these things are written down for our instruction, all right? And so we are trying to understand what the text means at a very historical level, just like what are they talking about? But then beyond that, we're asking ourselves, so why was this recorded for us? What is the benefit to God's people, not only in Moses' day, but in our day today? So that's the question we're going to keep in mind as we keep working our way through this. And as I said, most people see this as the end of the first section of the book because tonight we're going to see them leaving Sinai. And actually these silver trumpets, if you have your Bible open, at least in the ESV, that's the heading. The first section of chapter 10 is the silver trumpets. These silver trumpets are actually the instrument by which the people are going to be told, hey, it's time to leave. So let's look at that. We're going to start with the first 8 verses. So Numbers 10, 1 through 8. The Lord spoke to Moses, saying, make 2 silver trumpets of hammered work. You shall make them, and you shall use them for summoning the congregation and for breaking camp. And so here's basically what we get in the first 8 verses is God's instruction to Moses to make 2 trumpets. And again, you might have seen these in different depictions. No one knows for sure, but the general idea is these are probably the long, straight trumpets that open up at the end, not the valve trumpets that we have today, but rather more like a horn. And they're going to be used for, as he says, for breaking camp and for summoning the congregation together. And so he goes on then to give specific instructions about how all that works. So when both the trumpets are blown, all right, and you're going to see a distinction between blowing the trumpets and sounding an alarm. But when both trumpets are blown, all of the congregation is together. When only one of the trumpets is blown, the chiefs or the heads of the tribe are to gather together at the tent of meeting. But when an alarm is sounded, when an alarm is blown, see here is that it is the sons of Aaron, the priests, who are to blow these trumpets. And that this is to be something they're to continue to do. It's a perpetual statute. All right? And so we ask ourselves, so what's going on here? What was the significance of this for Israel initially? And then what is the ongoing significance for us today? And I think there's a couple of things that we can talk about here. I think it's interesting that how do the people know when it was time to move? Like if you just ask that question, like from our study of numbers so far, how do the people know when it was time to move? The cloud moves, right? And so what's the point of these trumpets? What is going on if the cloud and the movement of the cloud, which was called the command of the Lord in the previous chapter, why are we adding trumpets on top of that? Any thoughts on that? What's going on here? Why are we adding trumpets on top of the cloud in order to designate when it's time to move? Any thoughts? Sam?
Verse 9 seems to maybe suggest that...
I didn't read verse 9.
Oh, sorry.
That's the next section.
Never mind.
So, no, I mean, verse 9, these are also going to be used when they go to war, and they're going to be used when they get together to celebrate. So we'll talk about both of those in a second. But this first part, verses 1 through 8, are really about summoning the congregation together or breaking camp. All right? And so you do have summoning the congregation. That's not part of the cloud, right? This is, when you have to have a congregational meeting. We're not told exactly what that might be for, but there's a time when they need to summon everyone together. There's also a time when you need to summon the leaders together. And the sound for that is different. Again, no one knows exactly what the difference is between blowing the trumpet and sounding an alarm. The assumption is that blowing the trumpet is probably one long blast, where sounding an alarm was probably more of a staccato burst of sounds. But again, we're speculating based on what we know of more recent cultures. But nevertheless, there's clearly a difference where people would have known, okay, this is an alarm, this is blowing the trumpet. And it actually reminded me when both my mom's dad and Sarah's dad, my mom's dad and Sarah's mom's dad, so grandparents, both worked for the railroad. All right, and so we've gone to a number of railroad museums over the years, but one of the ones we went to was just outside of Charlotte, and they actually explained all the different horns, the different sounds that, if it's one blast, it's one long blast, if it's one short blast, if it's two blasts, these mean different things to people who know something about railroads, that the average person has no idea that they're trying to communicate. And it's kind of the same idea here. The different sounds mean different things. And it's just interesting to me that while God's movement is the source of the information. It's when the cloud moves, that God moves, but that's communicated to the congregation through the trumpets. And it's just an interesting picture of how God uses secondary means to communicate His will. We'll actually see this, throughout this chapter. In the very next section, who's going to take care of the wilderness? Well, God's going to take care of the wilderness. And yet, they're asking Moses' brother-in-law to come along because he knows the wilderness really well and he knows where he can. And it's just that balance between God is communicating His will through instruments and at the same time, He's directly responsible. So, Sammy, you were raising your hand there?
Yeah, and I'm guessing there's at least a pretty significant echo, pun intended, from Exodus 19, because it was a trumpet that was signaling, it's time for you to come and listen to God at the mountain.
Yeah, so this seems to be a way of communicating, like I said, communicating God's will. I think there's other things we can derive from this. There's a interesting parallel with what Paul talks about when he's discussing the difference between if we compare the trumpets to God's use of instruments. Paul then takes that analogy a step further and says that hey, the reason that prophecy is better than tongues is because if you make an indistinct sound, no one knows what to do. And this has actually become clear. And I think that imagery, that industry is very natural, because who is it that's blowing the trumpet? It's the priests who are responsible for what? For teaching God's word to the people. We think of the prophets as the teachers of Israel, but in truth, it was the priests who were the teachers of Israel. The prophets spoke God's direct words to the people, but who are the ones who were tasked with teaching the people the law, and teaching the people to walk in the law? That was actually the priest's job. They are the instruments that God uses to communicate His will. And as I said, Paul picks up this imagery and says, hey, this is why the instruments need to be clear. They need to communicate clearly God's will to the people. So obviously we don't have a cloud today, but we do search the scriptures to know God's will. And those who are tasked with communicating that to the people need to speak clearly. They need to make distinct sounds so that the people know what is being required. And that's one of the applications that Paul makes. I think there's also this sense of that the people are not individuals only. They are individuals, but they're not individuals only. They are members of the body of God. They are His people collectively, and they are to act in unison. And so when the cloud moves, it's not if you've seen the cloud move, oh, yeah, it's time to take up camp. When the cloud moves, the leaders, the priests, sound the alarm, and then the people know to act in unison that it's time to set out. And so again, there's an emphasis here on the people of God moving together as the people of God. And I think that is still a significant point for the church today. It's not that individual tribes don't do individual things. You'll see if you read through these verses that that in this chapter we'll see that when they do break camp, the tribe of Judah goes first, the ones on the east go first, then some of the Levites do their thing, and then those to the south go, and some more Levites do their thing, and those to the west go, and so they're acting individually, but they're doing it in unison. They're doing it together. And again, it's a reminder that as the people of God, we do not have separate agendas. There are separate congregations, individual congregations of Christ's church that meet here and there, that minister in various locations. But as the one apostolic church, the one church of God, we have a singular mission, which is to follow God and to seek first His kingdom and His righteousness. And therefore, again, there's that need for unity in hearing and seeing the voice of God. There's also an interesting, I think, point here that sometimes the whole congregation is called together, sometimes it's just the chiefs. Again, not to make too much of this, but I think this is at least implicit approval of some type of representative government, which is what we have in Presbyterian churches. Again, not that it's based solely on this passage, but the idea of representative government, the idea that there are elders, within the body who have a responsibility of representing the whole and making some decisions is actually part of what we see. And there are times when the whole congregation has to come together. There are certain things that the whole congregation has to do. But there are also times when just the leaders come together. So anyway, as we sort of wrestle with what's going on here, it's interesting to ask, just to ponder the question. Okay, why these trumpets? Why does God give these specific instructions about the trumpets? But as Sam was saying, in verse 9, we find out that these trumpets are used not only for the summoning of the congregation for the breaking of camp, but also for going to war. So if you look there at verse 9, it says, "And when you go to war in your land against the adversary who oppresses you, then you shall sound an alarm with the trumpets. You shall that you may be remembered before the Lord your God, and you shall be saved from your enemies." All right. So these trumpets communicate not only when it was time to break camp or to convene, they also communicated when it was time to go to war. But notice several things about verse 9, because I think there's actually an abundance of points here that we could derive from this verse. The first, he says, when you go to war in your land. Remember, we've seen this in the book of Numbers before, but there are hints throughout that are looking forward to the time when they are going to inhabit the land. All right? And these are just sort of promises, implicit promises that God is going to bring them into the land. All right? It's there from the beginning. God gives them, remember earlier we saw, God gives them laws that are only going to be applicable once they're in the land. All right? Here, God is saying, hey, you're going to have to go to war in your land. All right? But not only does he tell them that they're going to be laws, that they're going to go to war within the land, but they're going to be oppressed. They're going to face opposition. They're going to face enemies in the land. That there's going to be an enemy. There's going to be an adversary that seeks to oppress them in the land. And so again, there is a warning, if you want to call it that. Don't expect the road in front of you to be easy. In fact, the whole formation that they're going to leave Sinai is a war formation. That's why we did a census of the soldiers at the very beginning. God is being very honest with them about, hey, the road in front of you is going to be hard. The road in front of you is going to include opposition. It's going to include hardship. You're going to be going to war, but you are going to be in the land. But what I want you to notice, I think the most important phrase here in verse 9 is the phrase there, or the second half of the verse, where he says, "Sound the alarm that you may be remembered before the Lord your God." All right? Sound the alarm that you may be remembered before the Lord your God. And at least to my ears, that's the opposite of what we expect. All right, what do we expect? We expect sound the alarm so that you remember the Lord as you're going into battle. That's what we expect, right? You need to remember the Lord, and of course you need to remember the Lord. But really what you need is to be remembered by the Lord. Right? So you could say it's a reminder to the people that they are going to be remembered by the Lord, but it's the Lord taking note of them. It's the Lord remembering them that is really important here, because if they're going to be saved from their enemies, which is the last line, the Lord needs to remember them. And so the trumpet blast is so that the Lord will remember them. All right, but that again, sometimes we're like, well, is God going to forget what's going on here? What does that mean? Why does the trumpet blast incline God to remember them? What is that all about? How do we make sense of that? I mean, we think of Elijah's taunt in the right? You're not asleep. Did he forget you? It's like God doesn't forget. What's going on here? Why does he need to be reminded? Or how is this inclining him to remember? Any thoughts on that?
Sam, you brought it up earlier. Take it away.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is actually maybe where the covenant remembrance, like the trumpet blast on the day where God's covenant with Israel was established at Sinai. This is them calling on their covenant God to remember the covenant that he made with them, which is their only hope, that they would be his treasured possession, his his people out of all the peoples of the earth.
Yeah. So, Robert, that's your hand. The idea here is that the trumpet blast is the embodiment of faith, right? As you go into war, calling your God to come to your aid. So the Lord remembers them, not in the sense that he's prone to forget, but this is that covenant remembering, right? We have an invocation at the beginning of our worship service, right? We are invoking God's presence. Well, why in the world do you need to do that? God is omnipresent, right? God is everywhere. He was here before we got here. Why do you need to invoke God's presence? Well, it's because we're not asking for his general presence. We're asking for his covenant presence, his presence to bless, his presence to protect, his presence to provide in a way that he has covenanted with his people to do. All right? And so when we invoke God's presence in prayer at the beginning of worship service, that is an act of faith. We are coming together and asking God to remember his promise to be with his people when they're gathered together. And that's exactly what this trumpet blast is. We are blowing the trumpet, asking God to remember his promise to be with his people when they go to war. And so again, I think it is a telling thing for us. All right, what we need, and this is still true for us today. What we need more than anything is for God to remember us, is for God to go with us, is for God to be with us. As we go into our work, as we go into raising our kids. I had lunch with someone today, and we were commiserating about the challenges of teenage daughters. And it's hard. I think it's hard for moms too, but it's especially hard for dads. Like there are just certain things where I am bewildered and confused. And that's the reality. And if I'm going to parent my kids well, if I'm going to parent my sons well, if I'm going to love my wife well, if I'm going to love my neighbor well, I need the Lord to go with me. Right? God instructs us, to call out to him. This is a pattern, that is set for the people as a whole. They're to blow the trumpet when they're going into war. But in all things, we are to invoke God's presence with us. We are to call him to remember us according to his covenant promises as we go into all of the battlefields of life, whether the little battlefields of Canaan, or whether just the battlefields of trying to love your neighbor well, trying to raise your kids well, trying to do your job well. Because if we are going to succeed, if you are saved from your enemies, it is only going to be because God is with us. In ourselves, we are insufficient. In ourselves, we lack the resources, we lack the wisdom, we lack the will, we lack the power. And our flourishing, our success is completely dependent upon the Lord going with us. That's the lesson that God is teaching them here. He said, when you go to war, blow these trumpets so that I will remember you. Now again, that's something that the people can easily turn into an idol, as if it were automatic, as if God were somehow bound to the trumpets. That's not, God's not giving them an idol. He's not giving them, an ex opere operato, a superstition. Hey, if you just blow these trumpets, you'll bind me to be with you. He's not doing that. He's giving them these trumpets as a way to embody their faith, because we're embodied beings, and embodying your faith matters. In the same way that praying, saying the words, calling on the name of the Lord, it matters. It matters to say these things out loud, and to ask him to come with us. But verse 10 is an interesting balance to this, because not only are we calling on God's name, not only are we invoking his presence with these trumpets when we're going to war, but in verse 10 we're also invoking his presence when we're gathering for worship, which is what we see in verse 10. It says, on the day of your gladness, So he's just said, on the day that you go to battle, blow these trumpets, so that the Lord will remember you. Now, you see the same thing in verse 10. On the day of your gladness also, and at the appointed feasts, and at the beginning of your months, you shall blow your trumpets. Whether it's the 3 times a year feasts that you're gathering for, whether it's the new moons, the beginning of new months, whatever it is, if you're gathering for celebration, if you're gathering in your gladness, blow the trumpets over your burnt offerings and over your sacrifices and your peace offerings. They shall be a reminder of you before your God. So again, it's the same thing, that you might be remembered by the Lord. These trumpets will be a reminder of you before the Lord. I am the Lord your God. And so it's a reminder again that we don't just call on the name of the Lord when we're in trouble. We do that, of course, but we need the Lord not only in our wartime. We need Him in our gladness. We need Him when we're gathering for celebration and for worship. And I think by putting those two extremes out there, the idea is that the whole middle is covered as well. We need God in our lives. We need to be remembered by Him, whether gathering for worship or whether going to war. Because it is only as He remembers us that we will flourish in this life. So let me pause there. Just questions, comments, thoughts about all of this? Yes, we have very exciting children about that. That's all right.
So is there something interesting in the fact that the alarms are for the east or west camps moving, and the alarm for war? Does that infer that God also moves and would head the army? And blowing the horn is the gathering. So both trumpets blowing is all the people. One trumpet blowing is just leader, and then in the feasting you're blowing the horn over the sacrifice.
Yeah. So the alarms are, like you said, they are. You said for when the camps are leaving, they're also associated with war, and it is very clear that that the formation that they leave, that they break camp in, is always a war. And so, I think there is a significance there in the sense that God is teaching them, that we are now the church militant, is the language that gets used sometimes. But in this present, your existence is going to be, not always war. There are going to be times of respite, the time of gladness, the time of worship. But you are a people with an enemy. You are a people marching. You are people, about to engage in conquest. I do think that is very intentional. That they break camp. When they break camp ready for war. That is the instruction that they're given. Anyone else? All right, well, let's look at then the second half of the chapter here, and we'll see kind of how they break camp. So like I said, most commentators see 10, 11 as the beginning of the second section of the book, because this is when they actually leave Sinai. So it says, in the second year, the second month, on the 20th day of the month, the cloud lifted from over the tabernacle of the testimony, and the people of Israel set out by stages from the wilderness of Sinai, and the cloud settled down in the wilderness of Paran. Now, again, it's important to kind of remember how Hebrew narratives work. That is sort of the title for the section that's going to come for the next couple of chapters. Right? They're not going to end up in Paran for a little while, but we actually see this in Hebrew narrative all the time. There's a verse at the beginning that kind of gives you a summary of everything that's about to follow. And people sometimes get confused chronologically, and they start accusing the text of making mistakes when it's really them who made a mistake in how to read the text. That here's the beginning, and then now we go back and tell you how that all unfolded. So the section that we're in right now is the section of them leaving Sinai and going to Paran. Right? that is summarized for us in 11:12, and then verse 13 goes back to the setting out. All right? So it says, they set out for the first time at the command of the Lord by Moses. The standard of the camp of the people of Judah set out first, blah, blah, blah. Then, verse 17, and when the tabernacle was taken down, the sons of Gershon and the sons of Merari, who carried the tabernacle, set out, and the standard of the camp of Reuben set out. And then the Kohathites, verse 21, then the Kohathites set out, the standard of the camp of Ephraim set out. And we're going to come back to this a little bit later, but what did you just notice there? Maybe you didn't notice anything, because these are all very strange words. But again, remember the overall setup, right? You got three camps over here, 3 tribes down here, 3 tribes down here, 3 tribes up here, and then you've got the Levites in the middle, and the Levites consist of 3 clans. All right, so do you remember who the clans are? Gershon, Merari, and Kohath. All right, so I know my handwriting is terrible. Sorry. But you got Gershon, Merari, and Kohath. Now, these are all 3 Levites, and they have different jobs to do. Remember, the Kohathites, that's the tribe, that's the clan that Aaron is from, and they're the ones who are responsible for carrying the furnishings of the tabernacle. These 2 carry the tabernacle itself. All right. So when we were first given the instructions for how they were to set out, do you remember what we were told? Like, I'm just going to, this is Judah, and who's down here? I forget. Is this Simeon? Is that who this is? No, this is Reuben. So. All right, and then this is Ephraim, and this is Dan. All right, so we've got Judah and their 2 wingmen, Reuben and their 2 wingmen, Ephraim and their 2 wingmen, and Dan and their 2 wingmen. All right, and then we've got the Levites. So do you remember? Maybe you don't, but do you remember how are they told to march originally? J.R. Levites. E.D. What did we just see? J, 2 of the Levites, R, the rest of the Levites, E, D. So technically they are not following the instructions that we were given earlier in Levi. Now there's great debate, I'll just tell you, amongst commentators about the significance of that. All right, we're going to come back to it because we're actually going to see another way where they don't follow the instructions in verse 33. So just scan ahead with me here. Verse 33, it says, so they set out from the mount of the Lord 3 days' journey, and the ark of the covenant of the Lord went before them 3 days' journey. That doesn't mean the ark of the covenant was 3 days' journey ahead of them. It means for that 3 days' journey, the ark of the covenant went before them. All right? Where was the Ark of the Covenant supposed to be, according to the instructions? Right? With the Kohathites, where? In the middle. All right? Where is it? It's at the front. All right? And again, it's not commented on, and so there's great debate as what the significance of this is. But I also find it interesting that nowhere in this section are we told, and they did exactly as the Lord told them to do. That phrase is missing. And so I'm just curious. Again, this is not universally agreed on by the commentators, so you have to kind of wrestle with it way yourself. But I just wonder if these are not sort of the first seeds of self-will autonomy. Right? Why might the Gershonites and the Merarites do this? Well, it makes practical sense. Right? Because they're going to get there first, they can get the tabernacle set up, and then when the Kohathites get there with the stuff, they can put it right in. Haven't you ever gone on a move before? You want to get there first so you can clean the building so that when the stuff gets there, you can put it right in. It makes sense. It makes practical sense. Why would the ark go before them? Well, because that's what ancient did. They sent the symbol of their God before them as they were traveling, right? And so again, it makes sense in that culture, but to me, like, they're not following exactly what they were told to do. And nowhere in this section does it say they did exactly as they were told to do. And so I just wonder, is this the beginnings that they're already kind of doing things according to their own wisdom? They're already deviating from the plan. And that might explain why over the course of the next few chapters, we're going to see the people complain, and things are going to start to go badly from here. And I just wonder if these are not the first hints that they're not doing things exactly right. Yes.
Yeah, and that would really fit with some later narratives. That almost the same thing happens in the story of Saul. He gets this kind of small little thing, seemingly small thing, and then it just cascades from there.
Yeah.
Even in the story of David, in the spring, at the time when kings go out to battle, David's hanging out.
Yeah. No, I think you're right. I think you get these kind of hints in Hebrew narrative a lot that something's not right, and that in itself is instruction. So if I'm right, and again, I'll just tell you, it's not in all the commentaries, so I'm kind of going on about it. But from my perspective, they are already deviating. And we do see that in other narratives, more clearly in other narratives, but it seems to be here as well. And it is just a reminder to us that when we begin to deviate in the small things, when we begin to make sort of self-will discovery, well, this makes sense, or this is practical, or this will make it easier on us. When we begin to deviate in the small things, it isn't long before we're deviating in much bigger things. God is the Lord, and He demands unqualified obedience. Right? He gives us tremendous amounts of freedom. He gives us tremendous amount of flexibility in all kinds of things. But there are certain things He says, do this, do it this way. And when His word is clear, when His instructions are clear, to deviate from those is to start yourself down a path that leads to destruction. Enjoy the freedom that He gives you. There's tremendous freedom under His lordship. But there are also clear prescriptions. And when you deviate from those, even in what are seemingly small ways, when you begin to elevate your own wisdom and your own will above His word and above His will, you are on a dangerous path. And so, again, not all commentators agree that's what's going on here. It seems clear to me, and I think the silence is deafening, because this is the first time we don't hear it, and they did exactly what the Lord told them to do. It's just not there. And so, I think that's interesting. The language is, let's look at verse 28. This is the order of march of the people of Israel by their companies when they set out. This is what they do. It doesn't say, as the Lord had commanded. This is what they did. This is the way they went. And so, again, I think it's an interesting point. They're going out battle ready. I think that's obvious. That's clear. We made that point earlier. But there's also an element of self-will here that I think foretells a foreboding future. That things are not going to go well for people who do not obey wholeheartedly. Yes.
Yeah. One last note on that kind of progression. That's the beginning of Psalm 1.
Yeah.
You see a similar progression. Blessed is the man who walks not in the counsel of the wicked, nor stands in the way of sinners, nor sits in the seat of scoffers. There's walking, there's standing, there's sitting.
Yeah.
And there's a deepening sense of rebellion there.
Yeah. No, I think you're exactly right there. So, but again, let's press on. Verses 29 through 32 now. All right. Yeah, so Moses says to Hobab, as far as I know, this is the first time we've been introduced to him. I don't remember reading him earlier. Maybe I'm not remembering right. I didn't actually look it up. So. If he showed up earlier, I don't remember. But this is Moses' brother-in-law, right? He's the son of Ruel, who's also an elsewhere called Jethro, Midianite, Moses' father-in-law. Right? So again, don't get thrown off by the fact that there's two names here. Everybody in ancient world seems to have two names. But this is Moses' brother-in-law. It's the son of his father-in-law. And Moses says, we are setting out for the place of which the Lord said, I will give it to you. Come with us, and we will do good to you, for the Lord has promised good to Israel. All right? And again, just don't miss the wonder of that. We often, when we're thinking about sort of the multinational intent of God's blessing from the very beginning, we often point to Abraham, right? Because in Abraham 12, what are we told? That through you all the families of the earth will be blessed. You'll be blessed to be a blessing, right? We use that language, and it's exactly right. That's the root of it. And we actually see that Moses is here referring to that promise to Abraham. All right? Notice what he says. He says, we are setting out for the place that the Lord said, I will give it to you. He's talking about Genesis 12 at that point. He's talking about the promise to Abraham. We're going to the place that God said he was going to give to the children of Abraham. But notice he also picks up on the blessed to be a blessing part. He's telling this Midianite, hey, listen, if you come with us, you will be blessed because we're going to be blessed. Everybody who honors the Lord as God, everybody who attaches themselves to the people of God will be blessed by this blessing because as we go, God is going to bless us. All right? And so this is the promise. He says, we will do good to you because God is going to do good for us. It'll be good for you to be with us because we're going to be blessed people. But of course, Hobab says, I will not go. I will depart to my own land and to my own kindred. And again, it's tough to know in some of these narratives, whether this is just sort of the social debating that's expected. It's cursory. It's not really intended. It's like when you remember when Abraham wants to buy a piece of land. He's like, oh, I'd love to buy it. And the guy's like, oh no, I can never sell you anything. He says, but if it's worth 30 shekels of silver, and we're told that Abraham puts out the price. It's just kind of the way people talk. I'm not sure he ever really meant to say no. And we're actually not even told in this text that he says yes. But we learn in the book of Judges that he said yes. We learn from the book of Judges that he does go with them. And so this seems to be just politeness, and Moses responds to it by repeating the promise. All right. Verse 31, he said, "Please do not leave us." All right. And then verse 32 he says, "And if you do go with us, whatever good the Lord will do to us, the same we will do to you. You will be a full participant in the blessing that God's going to pour out on us." Right? So again, there's this promise of the inclusion of any who will attach themselves to the people of God. Yes.
Yeah, but even the part where he says, "For you know where we should camp in the wilderness, and you will serve as eyes for us." It's like you were saying earlier. Everybody has a part to play. Every single one of God's people has a role in what's coming. And it's like I don't think he's suggesting, hey, you can earn your way into this goodness. I think he's saying, no, you're actually one of us. You actually have the dignity of a role in what's about to come.
And yet again, you're getting ahead of it.
Sorry.
I skipped those verses on purpose. Yes, I think you're exactly right. And he adds to it this time. Because not only does he say, hey, listen, you will be blessed because you're with us. He's also saying that we will be blessed because you're with us. It reminds me of Paul's language in Romans 1, where he says, hey, my heart's longing is to come and be with you and use my gifts to bless you. And then he almost immediately corrects himself, and I know that it'll be mutual because you'll use your gifts to bless me too. There is a goodness in the people of God being together. But the interesting thing here is that this is a Midianite. He's saying, hey, listen, you have a role to play too, and we can benefit from you. And again, the idea that God is leading them into the wilderness and they need a local to tell them where to camp, is just a little bit perplexing to us. This is like someone saying, hey, you're really familiar with the Appalachian Trail. Can you come with me so I kind of know where to set up camp? Or when my family did not grow up camping. The one camping trip I've ever been on was up to Minnesota to the Boundary Waters. And when we went with a guy who had led that trip like 150 times. Because he knew where to camp, he knew where to fish, he knew what side of the. I can still remember getting to an island that we're going to camp on for the night, and my brothers start setting up the tents, and he's like, no, we got to go to the other side of the island. If we set up here, we're going to get crushed by the storm. That's coming. We got to be on the other side of the island, behind these trees, because the storm's coming from this direction. And that's just sort of the local knowledge, and that's exactly what Moses is saying. He said, listen, you've got the local knowledge. And again, I think that is so telling to us, because who's leading them? Well, of course, God is leading them. And we're going to actually see more about it in the next verses. But yet God uses instruments. Not only does everybody have a role to play, but everybody can actually be an instrument in the hands of the Lord. All right? We're not all gifted the same way, but you guys are gifted differently. Some of you have the gift of encouragement. Some of you have the gift of help. Some of you, I don't think we're not supposed to read the New Testament list of gifts and say, this is an exhaustive list, and I got to figure out which one is mine necessarily. But you have a sense of what your gifting is. All right. And you know how you can help others to walk more and more faithfully in following after Jesus. And so who is it? Who is it that sanctifies us? Who is it that conforms us to the image of Christ? Who is it that builds us up to maturity? Well, of course it's Jesus. God does that. And yet he uses human instruments to do it. God is going to lead him in the wilderness. He's going to show him where to camp, and yet he might use the wisdom of the local to do it. And you can be blessed by being part of the people of God. That promise that he's making here to Hobad, that belongs to everyone in every generation who attaches themselves to the people of God. If you will attach yourself to my people, then you will enter into the blessing that belongs to my people. God works all things together for the good of those who love him. God works for the good of his people. And if you call on the name of Jesus, you belong to him. You belong to his people. If you are in Christ, you are a child of Abraham and an heir of all of the promises. And so if you attach yourself to people, the blessing is yours. But not only is the blessing yours, in the sense that he is going to provide and work for your good, but also that dignity of having a role to play in the work that he is doing. You might be an instrument by which he brings blessing to somebody else. Right? And it could be your local knowledge. Some of you are really, really gifted. Like I said, at encouragement, just writing notes of encouragement, sending a text, that, hey, I'm praying for you, send an email, of thanks. Some of you are good at seeing needs and coming alongside. I don't know who they're from, but there are two little outfits for magic sitting on my desk right now. And we've gotten almost all the clothes they wear have been given to us by people in the church. And that's just people coming alongside, seeing a need, coming alongside. I mean, the swing set outside is repaired now because someone said, hey, you know what? That top beam's twisted a little bit. We need to fix that. And they did. These are just examples of things that people do. You might not think fixing a swing set is a spiritual gift, but it's a gift to the church family, right? Another encouragement, clothes for a baby. These are all things that we get to do. And I think we see that example here in Hope. And he said, listen, if you come with us, your gifts are going to be a blessing to us. Not only will you be blessed by joining yourself to us, but will be blessed by your presence. All right? Let me just pause there. Any questions or thoughts, or anybody want to jump in on that? All right, let's keep on. Verse 32. Oh, I'm sorry, verse 33. I can't see it's on my glasses. Verse 33. So they set out from the mount of the Lord, 3 days' journey. And the ark of the covenant of the Lord went before them 3 days' journey to seek out a resting place for them. And the cloud of the Lord was over them by day whenever they set out from the camp. Now, we've already commented on the ark thing going before them. I'm going to leave that alone for now. That may or may not be evidence of their disobedience. But nevertheless, notice what the Lord is doing. All right? That's what I want you to see here, because this is a picture of Psalm 23. All right? Notice the Lord is going before them. He is going with them to seek out a resting place for them. All right? So where is he leading them? He's leading them to a resting place. He's leading them to a place where they can dwell safely and securely. Again, you just think of the language of Psalm 23, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He leads me by quiet waters, in green pastures, all right? But there's also a hint here of the valley of the shadow of death, right? Because the cloud of the Lord was over them by day. Not just leading them, but over them, protecting them. And again, the commentators say, it's not hard to figure out why they would need a cloud to protect them. They're in the wilderness, where the temperatures regularly reach triple digits, and the wind is scorching, and the shade would be oh so welcome. And so God is not only leading them to a resting place, He is their cloud of protection as they go. And so, He's leading them through the valley of the shadow of death. He's leading them to green pastures and to quiet waters. But even as they go, the rod and the staff are there to comfort and to protect. And so, we're again familiar with the language of Psalm 23, but that's what's going on here. God is being their shepherd here as they go. It's this reality that Moses is celebrating at the very end. And we're told that whenever the ark set out, Moses would say, "Arise, O Lord, and let your enemies be scattered, and let those who hate you flee before you." And when it rested, he said, "Return, O Lord, to the 10,000 thousands of Israel." And so, again, I think we see the significance of liturgy in those last phrases, right? And again, it doesn't have to be. I'm not saying we need to start using a common prayer or something like that, but although there could be worse things. But every church has its liturgy. Whether you're a liturgical church or not, you have those things that you say over and over and over again, and that's right and that's good. All right, it is right and it's good to come back to foundational truths. And the foundational truths that the people of Israel needed to know as they were setting out is that it is the Lord who goes before them to scatter their enemies. Who is going to open the way to the promised land? Who is going to scatter the enemies as they go to the promised land? It is the Lord. And they needed to be reminded of that daily. Daily, as the cloud lifted, Moses was saying these words. Arise, O Lord, and go, and may your enemies be scattered before you. And then as they came back together, it's like, who is our protection as we rest here? Who is watching? Return, O Lord, and watch over this great multitude. And so, again, it's fair for us to ask, sort of at the corporate level, what are our liturgies? What are we saying regularly? And we're actually very conscious of that here at Trinity. When we put together the worship services, we're very conscious. Some people are like, couldn't we have a little more variety in the word of worship? Yeah, I mean, there's nothing sacred about the way that we do it. We actually do it the same way, very intentionally, so that there's an expectation, so that you know this is what we're doing in worship. We're coming into His presence. We are proclaiming His excellencies. We are invoking His presence with us. We are confessing our faith in the Word that He has revealed. We are responding to that by confessing the fact that we have fallen short of what we believe, and then celebrating His grace to us, and then our response. And so there's two songs after the confession of sin. One is a celebration of the gospel. The second one is a song that talks about our devotion now to walk a life worthy of that gospel, which then leads us into the offering, as a token, the giving of our tithes as a token of our devotion, our full devotion to Him, offering our whole selves to Him as burnt offerings, which then leads us, to put all our cares and petitions before Him, saying, hey, listen, we can only do this, we can only live this life if you're with us, if you're helping us. And so we make our pastoral prayers, which then leads us into submitting to His, having set our cares and concerns before we sit down at His feet to be faced, to be fed by His Word. And that's a very intense, that's a liturgy. This is what we say every week as we gather together. And it's meant to remind us that the Christian life is rooted in the gospel. We don't start with our pledges of obedience. We start with the magnitude of who He is, the acknowledgement that we've fallen short of His glory, but that He's provided the means of reconciliation. And then only then do we confess our faith and pledge our devotion and come to feast upon His Word. That's a liturgy that we repeat over and over and over again. But I would suggest to you that we can actually ask, what's our own personal liturgies? In the Reformed tradition, we talk not only about corporate worship, we actually talk about private worship. In private worship, most people aren't familiar with that language. They think more of private devotions or quiet times, and there's nothing wrong with that language. You can call it quiet time, you can call it private devotions, whatever. But the language of personal worship or family worship is actually very helpful, because it reminds us that there's that same sort of liturgy going on. What's the liturgy of your day? Do you begin your days remembering, Lord, arise and go with me, into whatever it is that you have marked out for me to do today? Are you ending your day by saying, oh, thank you for bringing me to the end of the day? Watch over me tonight and give me the rest I need, that I can be refreshed for tomorrow. Liturgies matter, right? But they need to be rooted in the truth. They need to be rooted in the truth of God's Word. But the things that we tell ourselves over and over and over again are the things that we will believe. Right? I was, again, talking to a counselor about a situation that I was dealing with, and he said, the physiological responses to stress are you can't really contain. So he says, what matters is how you talk to yourself when you're experiencing those things. It just matters. How are you talking to yourself in the midst of whatever stress you're experiencing? Right? And I think we need to learn to talk to ourselves in the language of Scripture. We need to learn to talk to ourselves in liturgies. We need to learn to talk to ourselves. Lord, I know you're with me. I think of this. We actually see the psalmist doing this, do we not? He says, "Why are you downcast, O my soul?" He's talking to himself. "Why are you downcast, O my soul? I will yet praise the Lord, for He is with me." He's preaching the gospel to himself. And I think Moses gives us an example of that here. We can learn from not only our corporate worship, but even our own private family worship. So last thoughts, comments?
Yeah, what just struck me, there is so much grace here at the end of this chapter.
Yeah.
And if your earlier point is right, that the people are actually beginning to wander, the fact that the Lord is still with them just highlights that grace all the more.
Yeah.
And to bring that forward into today, for people like me who often struggle with this private worship and family worship, I can't tell you just how weak I am in those areas. The Lord maintains His faithfulness, and he just invites us, keep trusting me. Yes, repent, pursue new obedience, but keep trusting me, because this is what I'm like. This is the kind of God I am. I go with weak and stubborn and failing people.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. That's a good word to remember, because we are. I mean, I think most of us are weak, in these areas. And, for one thing, these are really short liturgies. Don't kill yourself. I mean, I tell people, the Lord's Prayer was given to us for a reason. Use it. If you want to, you could organize. If you had a whole day, if you had a day of prayer, I can remember back in seminary, they gave us a day each semester for a day of prayer. You can organize that whole day around the Lord's Prayer if you want to. Or you can pray the Lord's Prayer in 60 seconds, or 30 seconds, and as long as your heart is engaged, bring these words before the Lord. Use these words. Use some of the prayers that we see Paul praying for the church. Don't make it a burden to yourself. Don't set up some goal that you're never going to achieve. But simply, remind yourself, arise, O Lord, and go before me in this day. Scatter the enemies who I'm going to encounter today. Because my only hope is that you clear the path for me today. At the end of the eternal Lord, thank you for leading us today. Now watch over us as we sleep, that we can be refreshed for tomorrow. Keep it simple, but keep it gospel, grace-filled. God's promises, claiming His promises for the life you've been called to live. So. All right, any last words? Let me close this in prayer. Father God, we thank you for this word. We thank you for the example that you are giving us here through the book of Numbers. And we do thank you for the mercy and the grace that you show this people who seem to already be wandering, even as they're leaving Sinai. Father, we thank you for your steadfast love and your patience with them, because we're just like them. And we know that you'll be patient with us. Indeed, be patient with us, Father, and lead us more and more in what you would have us to do. We pray in Jesus' name.